All right, well, let's get rolling. My name's Dave Lash. I'm with the Chebacco Lake and Watershed Association. I just want to say up front, this webinar would not have been possible without Carla Villa thinking up the idea in the first place and being dogged about making sure that we all got together and figured out how to do it and the logistics and all that. So thanks so much, Carla. I notice in the signups that a lot of folks are not from the Chebacco watershed. So I thought we might just start. I'll give you a very quick overview or context of where we are and what we're all about, and then I'll turn it over to Joe. So I'm going to start big, and then I'll zoom in so you can see Alewife Brook, where our fish run is. This is the Essex River Watershed in red, divided into two parts. The lower reach is the estuary tidal portion, and the upper reach is the Chebacco watershed, which is about 7 square miles or about 4,600 acres. This diamond shape in the middle, you can see Chebacco Lake and the tributary ponds that are also part of the watershed. And the link between the lake and the tidal area is Alewife Brook. So I'm going to go in one more time. And it's this section here from the northeast corner of the lake to the edge of the watershed. Of course, we're still down gradient. It's just that now to the east, we're now in the Essex River lower reach part of the Essex River watershed. And then it quickly becomes tidal just about where that number 22 is, if you can see that part. But this section is about 1.5 miles. And this has been an excellent partnership with the Division of Marine Fisheries for going on about 20 years since the beaver repopulated or reemerged in eastern Massachusetts. And that's been a great collaboration to address that problem and keep the flow for alewife and the general good conditions in terms of water level balance in the watershed. And then I'll just switch quickly to, sorry, I'm letting more folks in. Give me 1 second. There we go. And then this gives you, whoops, wrong scale. This is a portion of the Essex, the Alewife Brook, actually right at the terminus of the watershed. This is at the Apple Street Bridge. And the photo in the upper right kind of gives you a typical photo of the narrowness of Alewife Brook. It actually goes through 5 different sections, and each one is different width, different hydrology, different vegetation pattern, and so forth. This is a cleanup that we did last August. And the fellow in the navy blue shirt with his back to us is Joe from Marine Fisheries. So with that, I'm going to stop my share and turn it over to him, and he can do a little more explanation of his role as a biologist with Division of Marine Fisheries and tell us everything we want to know about alewife. Joe, over to you.
All right, thanks, Dave. Just let me share my screen in 1 second. Nice to meet everyone, and thank you all for coming. Hold on, there we go. All right, can everyone see that fine?
Yes.
Yep. All right, perfect. Thank you. All right, so yep, my name is Joe, like David said, and I am the Diadromous Biologist for the North Shore of Massachusetts. And I work for the Division of Marine Fisheries. So kind of giving an overview or an overarching sort of theme, like to start out, well, what is diadromy? There we go. All right. So diadromous refers to sort of the two life cycles that these fish go through. And so they spend part of their life in the marine ecosystem and then part of their life in the freshwater rivers and ponds that we have here. And we have two kinds of diadromous fishes. We have what's referred to as anadromous, which is like our river herring, and salmon, which spend most of their life in the marine environment, and then they come back into the freshwater environment, into our rivers and lakes and ponds to spawn before they make their way back out. Now, fishes that we have here that are anadromous, and I apologize that I'm looking to my right a little bit. I have two screens here, so just checking to make sure I'm on the right thing. So our anadromous species are our river herring, shad. We have, well, we used to have salmon. There's not too many of them left. And we also have rainbow smelt. And so those are all fish that spend most of their life in the marine environment, come into our freshwater rivers and lakes and ponds to spawn. But we also have another species. It's only one, or another type of diadromous fish called catadromous. And they are the opposite of our anadromous species. So they actually spend most of their life in our freshwater systems, rivers, ponds, lakes, and then they go out into the marine environment to spawn. And we only have one catadromous species in all of North America, and that is our American eel. So it's pretty cool. And I'll start out actually with, oops, wrong screen. Here we go. There we go. And so I'll start out with talking a little bit about our American eel. Like I said, it's the only catadromous species in all of North America. It's one of the most farthest ranging fish species in North America. You can find it all along the East Coast. It goes up to the Mississippi River, and you can find eels all the way in Ohio and Kentucky, and they're all part of actually this one big population that we call a panmictic population. So some of the really cool things about these eels is that all of the eels, every single one that go out to the ocean to breed, all go to the same spot. They go into, which we don't really know specifically where it is, but it's somewhere in the Sargasso Sea. And so all of the eels on the East Coast, whether they're the Floridian eels, whether they're from Maine, they all, when they're ready to spawn, go out into the middle of the Sargasso Sea, spawn somewhere out there where they have this life cycle. So the eggs are laid in the Sargasso Sea, then they go through a larval phase, which you can see in the depiction here, which we call a leptocephalus larvae. And they're essentially this sort of see-through leaf. And they get carried through that stage by the Gulf Stream current, and they get distributed up the East Coast, and then they transform when they're ready, almost about ready to go into our rivers. They transform into what we know as elvers, or the glass eels, which is what you've probably heard of before. And then they swim up into our rivers in the spring, where they'll spend most of their lives in our freshwater rivers and lakes and ponds. Now, they can live anywhere from 7 to 20 plus years in our freshwater systems, depending on where they're going and which rivers they're going into. And some of the really cool things about this is, about eels, is they don't have a specific sex when they are in the glass eel stage. So they're not actually, so they aren't male or female at that point. They're not turning male or female until they're actually matured. And that happens, either it could be 7 to 20 years. We're not really sure about, the factors that signal these fish to go out to spawn, but there's some kind of life history that signals them when they're ready to spawn. But so they have this really kind of cool life cycle where, depending on which river system they're going into and how many eels are currently in the system, is really what decides whether they become a male or a female eel. So males tend to not range as far up into these river systems as the females do. And when they settle in an area that has a higher population of eels, they tend to turn out to be male rather than female. And if they settle in an area where there isn't as much population of eels, they turn out to be female. That's sort of the leading hypothesis on how they determine whether they become male or female. So pretty cool. I think it's pretty fascinating, at least. Which then they move into after about a year, they start to be fully pigmented, in which they look like your regular eels, which we call yellow eels, where they can live out their life cycle in the freshwater system. And then just when they're ready to spawn and head out to the sea, they actually go into a different metamorphosis and become a silver eel, where their eyes sort of enlarge. They kind of take on sort of a silvery coloration. And they essentially shrink all their organs so that there's pretty much nothing but their reproductive organs left. And that's when they make their movements out to the Sargasso Sea. And that usually happens sometimes around October to November, December, when they're usually out migrating. So a lot of cool stuff about eels, but not that's not our only diadromous species, or oh, well, actually a little bit more. Sorry, forgot I have these maps. If this will work. Here we go. So there's a little bit of explaining about where they are and sort of the life history of what's happening here. So we can see in the top left corner, I don't know if you can see my cursor at all, but in the top left map, you can see where the area is marked in the Sargasso Sea. And that's pretty much where we think, or where we've narrowed down somewhere in those circles that the eels are spawning and laying their eggs. Which then, if you look at the map below that, you can see the sort of trace of the Gulf Stream, how it traces up to the East Coast, which is what they hitch a ride on. And then eventually, when they're at the right stage of development, they get off and enter some of our rivers. So pretty cool stuff. Then moving on to our next species, we have our river herring, which is our diadromous or our anadromous species in the Chebacco or Alewife Brook. And in Massachusetts, we have two different kinds of river herring. We have alewives and we have blueback herring. Alewives tend to prefer to spawn in more lake and pond habitats, and our bluebacks tend to spawn more of in our riverine section. So they prefer a little bit more of a moving water. Alewife Brook actually and Chebacco Lake have almost exclusively an alewife population. So almost all the fish there are going to be your alewives. Oops. Now, another thing about river herring is, unlike salmon, which when they go up into the rivers and spawn, they usually die after spawning. River herring are what we call idioparous, so they have the ability to spawn more than once in their life. So the adults that go into the pond spawn and will actually make their way back out to the ocean, spend another year in the ocean, and then the following year they can spawn maybe even 3 or 4 times. So given that they survive, they can return up to 4 or 5 times even. And historically, they probably could have done that even longer. We would have had a greater age range of fish in probably all of our rivers, but due to overfishing and habitat loss, we've kind of really shrunk down. And so we mostly have between 3 and I'd say 5-year-olds is most of the population, and they can begin spawning usually around 3 years of age. So they spend around 3 years out in the ocean before they make their return back to our rivers to spawn. And so why are they important? Why are they, other than the fact that it's amazing that they make that journey? Well, they're pretty much food for everything. If it can fit a river herring in its mouth, it's probably going to eat it. As you can see, pretty much most of these pictures are actually predators in the process of eating river herring. You have osprey, great blue herons, even gulls, seagulls of all kinds, cormorants. If you've ever been around the lake, I'm sure you've seen those guys. We have a bunch of different species of herons, actually. In the bottom right is a black-capped night heron. We also have green heron species. All of them will eat alewives. Our freshwater fishes species, largemouth bass, chain pickerel, all of those. If they can fit a river herring in their mouth, I'm sure they will. snapping turtles, even the eels will eat some of the river herring, usually the ones that die for some reason, and sink to the bottom. I've actually seen it in person before. It's kind of cool. Um, and river otters and basically all kinds of predators. And so they kind of form this chain between the marine and freshwater ecosystem where they carry nutrients from our marine environment and help supplant our freshwater ponds and streams, not only for the predators but also for our nutrients and minerals and all things like that. So now kind of narrowing into the Chebacco system. So last year, our count of river herring was about 36,000 river herring returning, which is one of the higher counts for that site. But we really have potential for way more. That we should be able to easily support 50,000 fish. And given the size of Chebacco Lake and how much spawning habitat they have there, there's potential that somewhere around 400,000 or so, we could support somewhere around 400,000 of fish or so, just given the size of the lake and everything. Unfortunately, we're not close to that yet. We're hopefully getting there, but it's sure an uphill battle. And really the biggest factors that are affecting populations are really habitat loss or degradation, and in blockages to passages. So anything like dams. Fortunately, the Chebacco and Alewife Brook have no dams. It's one of the few undammed systems that we have, but it is not without its problems, I would say. And so kind of to go back just a little bit into the history of herring in the Essex River, there's been herring. Oops, I forgot to advance this slide. I'm working on two screens, sorry. So yeah, we have a couple of pictures. You can see just by the size of the lake of Chebacco. There's a good amount of space around. It's also considered one of Massachusetts' Great Lakes, or Great Ponds, I should say, sorry. Which means that it's greater than 10 acres, but it also means that it's held in trust by the state, which kind of causes a little bit of confusion about who really cares for the lake. And I know probably Dave can speak more to that part of the things, maybe later on. And so those are kind of setting the stage of some of the issues that we have in Chebacco and what we have the potential for. Historically, there has been river herring in Alewife Brook and Chebacco for quite a while. In the 1920s, there was a biologist who wrote a report on alewife fisheries in Massachusetts, David Belding, who worked for the Department of Fish and Wildlife, or Fish and Game, which was the predecessor to the Department of Marine Fisheries. And so we had a real history of a lot of overfishing there. Even as early back into the 1920s, they saw really serious decline in the numbers of alewives that they were having across the state, really. And you can see how this probably caused some of the issues. They used to just basically back up a truck to the river, set a net across the whole stream, and then scoop out as many river herrings as they can. You can see there's a couple kids actually doing it in one of these photos here. The truck on the left, you can see, says Essex 1752 Gaybrook Garage. So not sure if that's around or anything, or where that would have been, but just some cool history to kind of see why Massachusetts cares so much for river herring, and the history of everything. Ooh, come on. Okay, so now we saw a little we saw an overview from Dave about Chebacco Lake and where it's situated and how it connects to the Essex River and the Essex River estuaries. It flows about almost 2 miles from the lake to the Essex River. And like I said, it's one of the few undammed rivers in Massachusetts, which is exciting, but it's not without its problems and blockages. And so this is actually a picture from that 1920 report by Dr. Belding. And it says, it quoted in there, it says, wire or wooden fences, rubbish, and old ruins which have been placed have fallen into the stream and are the most common form of artificial obstructions in Chebacco Lake. So in Chebacco Brook is what they called it back then. And so this is actually a picture from them. And this was in 1920. So even though there has been no dams on here, there's been issues with passage and blockages since, as early as 1920 and before. And so what are these blockages? We don't have too much to worry about, too much about debris and stuff in the state, in the ponds these days, but we have a few low gradient portions of the stream that often fill in with vegetation, which is why we did that cleanup in Alewife Brook, to try to get rid of some of the overgrown vegetation there. And we now have beavers in the past 10 or 15 years or so, when they've sort of been reintroduced into the state and have taken and have grown in population quite a bit. Historically, there would have been beaver trappers and a beaver management program, but currently the more recent laws around trapping of beavers have kind of prohibited this sort of management of beavers, and they are starting to grow in population quite a bit and causes quite a number of issues actually on Alewife Brook specifically. And the other problem is the people the people problem of this. As you can see, this graph showing the population in Essex County from around 1970s. And we are currently at 810 or so thousand people in Essex County. And we're starting to grow in the number of houses also being put in the area. And all of this kind of relates back to the water situation, how much water is being taken out of the watershed for wells and everything. As we get more houses, as we get more people, the need for more water grows, which means that there's less water ending up back into our groundwater systems, back into our lakes, rivers, and streams, especially during droughts, which we've been having pretty regularly the past few years. We're still currently in a drought. Last year, Alewife Brook, sections of it went completely dry, which we see sometimes in more extreme droughts. So those are kind of things that are affecting the brook, affecting the population, why we're probably not at that 400,000 level just yet. And so how do we keep track of everything? So we have a couple of different ways we monitor. So this is the counter system over by Pond Street. We just installed the other day. We got to make a couple adjustments to it, but it should be pretty much up and running by tomorrow. And so how this works is this is an electronic resistivity counter. And so if you look in the picture on the left, you can kind of see right in the middle where that frame sort of is with the viewing board. There's a couple little PVC tubes, and they look like that sort of picture on the right there. And inside those tubes, there's a conductivity field. And as a fish swims through those tubes, it disrupts that conductivity field. And this box up in the top corner then records that as a fish passing through the tube. And so then we get an accurate count, or a pretty accurate count of how many fish are moving through and up into the systems. So that's how we monitor them, our alewives. And then we also actually monitor eels also on the system, and we have pike nets somewhere in there. So we catch a certain number or certain percent of eels, and then we can monitor that population through that way. And these are sort of indices, so it's not necessarily exactly the total population, but it helps us track sort of the trends that are happening, from year to year. And so why do we do all that? Why do we monitor? Why do we take all this information? We do it for a bunch of different reasons. A lot of local knowledge and local participation for stewardship is important. We see lots of people when we're visiting the counter over at Pond Street, and most of them, if not all of them, have been amazingly receptive, and the community really seems to rally around it, which is amazing to see. We also monitor them for harvest purposes, which we don't really have much anymore. There's a few rivers in the South Shore that have some harvest plans accepted, but there's really very little harvest currently going on. Um, Most of the populations, although they have been, a lot of them have been increasing more, they're still not really what they once were. Um, and another reason why we do this is for, state and coastwide management. So we report our counting numbers to the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, which then they compile pretty much all of the coastwide counting operations and numbers into what we have like a stock assessment every few years to sort of see the whole health of all of river herring on the East Coast. And so we supply some of our data to that. They're pretty strict on what they take in terms of what they allow to be put into the stock assessment. So usually we need to have, or they need to have a counting system that's been running for at least 10 years and has some pretty accurate count data. So where are our populations so far, right? We have a couple graphs of some of the populations that we've been tracking. So on the left, we have our alewife from our counter system. Since it was installed in 2014, that was the first year that it was installed at the Pond Street location. And we've kind of have this up and down sort of situation happening where we kind of peaked in 2016 or so, then had a really low in 2020, and we're back up on the way up so far. And a lot of this has to do with the droughts that we've had. Couple of these were some pretty serious drought years where the pond ran dry, and so it was probably unlikely that not as many fish made it back out to the ocean to survive, and then we end up seeing those sort of numbers come back to us in the next 3 years. So if fish can't get out of the pond for that year, then we'll see a decline from sort of 3 years down the road when we would be looking to see those fish return as adults. So it's kind of the situations that we've had here.
Joe, can I just break in and ask you
Yeah.
to confirm that the alewife that go out will only come back and spawn in the same place that they uh, were born in the first place?
Yes, yes. That is typically there, and they can tend to come back. There is a little bit of straying, so there'll be a certain percentage that will end up in a neighboring system for some reason, but most of them, like 90, 98, 99% of them are going to end up in the system in which they were born in. So these are all fish that so the fish we see returning, the adults that we see in our that coming into the rivers were fish that would have been born in Chebacco Lake 3 or 4 years prior. So when we have a drought year, that's how we kind of see that effect. It doesn't happen immediately the next year. It sort of happens 3 years down the road. And then we've also been sort of the last couple of years in this sort of a boom years of American eels that we've had. We've had a skyrocketing number of American eels the last 2 years. We had over, I think, over 70,000 the past 2 years of collecting. And I think the highest total prior to that was somewhere around 20,000. So not totally sure how that relates to what's happening in Alewife Brook. It's kind of a little bit of a mystery. The eels are a little bit of a more of enigma than our alewives, but it's good to see that they're increasing. So what have we been doing to help? So like those pictures that Dave showed in the beginning, we had our alewife cleanup. This is a section that is pretty low gradient, so it gets pretty clogged with vegetation often. And we had an awesome crew come out this past summer to clear some of that excess vegetation, kind of open up the stream back to what it was. We also developed a stream maintenance plan, sort of an overarching plan for the whole watershed, the areas that we need to clean up, and hopefully in the next few years we'll kind of hit some of those other areas. Come on, there we go. And so what other kind of future work do we have? Yeah, like I said, we're going to continue to working on our stream maintenance plan. We have a few other areas that we'll have to clean up, or we'll look to clean up, and then continue to monitor our beaver situation, clearing out blockages um, from any beaver dams that we have in the system, and just continuing to monitor both the eels and the alewives, and hoping for some good returns. And so that's about all I have for today. And if anyone has any questions.
Super, Joe. Thank you so much. Could you speak a bit about two things? One, what's happening on the ocean side of the cycle, things we should be aware of that are either good or bad? And are there, second part of my question on the freshwater side, are there restoration efforts in other places that have been spectacular successes that we should know about?
Sure. So we're not 100% sure what's happening in the marine environment. We have a number of fisheries that kind of catch some bycatch numbers, but it's not totally adding up to like the whole picture. So there's a little bit of an unknown about what's happening with their populations. So it's kind of difficult. So technically each river has its own population, since all of the fish that are spawned in a river come back to that river later on once they're adults. But we don't necessarily know as well, and we can't really track even with genetics as well as to what happens or where they're mixing out in the ocean, and sort of which populations are coming together and mixing. So there's a little bit of an unknown sort of situation was what's happening out there, and mortality rates with certain fisheries, or even just natural mortality. So that part's a little bit of an unknown. And what was the second one you said in the freshwater? Some success stories. So really, first one that comes to mind is probably the Mystic Lakes. After the dam there at the upper loop of Mystic Lakes Dam was revamped with fish passage, we've seen a really amazing incline in the population there. It's been a really great success story, and last year was actually the highest number of river herring returning to a system was in the Mystic River. So I think that's probably one of our greatest success stories.
Super. Okay, so let's throw it open for other questions. Joe, could you stop your share so
Yes,
we can see everybody's window, and it'll be
you
easier
got
to
it.
see who wants to speak. Why don't we just kind of go forward? If that doesn't work, if it's too crazy, then there's a little hand raising icon that you can press, and then I'll call on you. But let's just let it fly and see what happens.
Hey, Joe, this is Jay McKay. Great job, by the way. You had mentioned that there was about 36,000 individuals returning to
Sure.
Chebacco in that neighborhood, and you said the lake probably has a capacity of about 400,000. Do you have any data or anecdotal information about what the prior populations actually were historically?
Not really. So like I said, the probably the best source of information that we have is that report from the David Belding in 1920. And it doesn't really report actual total populations. I mean, they wouldn't have had a way to monitor that at the time, but you can see some of the harvest rates. And I think in 1920 there was maybe nine, I forget, it's in barrels. That's how they measured the fish back then. So maybe 900 barrels. I'd have to look it up again. But so no, we don't have a real good idea of what it was at one point. But we do know that even as early as the 1920s, there was already serious declines in a lot of the um, neighboring systems, especially in like the Ipswich. They had lost a lot of their pond spawning habitats to dams and water systems or water supply systems. And we know that they were already experiencing a significant loss of fish in at least the Ipswich for sure in as early as 1920. So
I'll just add, Jay, that several of us on the call have lived on the lake for 40 years plus. And when we moved, my wife and I moved here in 1987. We were quite surprised in the spring and early summer when we opened our bedroom windows to hear boiling water going on all night long. Every night it happened. And we just don't hear that anymore. So in 40 years, we've dramatically decreased the population. I mean, Joe's going back 100 years, but even in the last 40 years, there's a dramatic decline.
Understood. Thank you. One quick follow-up question, and you probably mentioned it, but I missed it. What was the herring actually harvested for? Was it food or was it for bait or
It was probably a little of both. They definitely used them as fertilizer quite a lot to supplant in the a lot of the farms. Probably some of it would have been used for food, smoked it, or some sort of preservation method kind of thing. So it would have probably been a little bit of everything.
Great, thank you. Thanks.
Alan?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Two things. First of all, I came here in the mid to late 70s, and I'm pretty sure the town was still licensing one person to harvest alewives. I think it was for fish bait at the time. I don't know when that disappeared, but that was still in place in the 70s. And the other thing I want to do, maybe you could speak to, speaking of the 70s, when we first moved here, every winter, there were probably like 10 or 12 smelt houses in the Essex River in the wintertime. And you mentioned smelt as one of the migratory species. And what if you just talk a little bit about what happened to them? Are they going to return? Is it, what's up with the smelt?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's maybe not the most uplifting of stories. We've seen a huge decline in smelt populations, pretty much all along the East Coast. Maine's sort of the last stronghold, really. We have one river that's pretty productive in Massachusetts still at the Fore River, or the Jones River down in Quincy. But yeah, they seem to be probably on the losing end of the climate change. They're really a cold water fish. They prefer cold water. They're coming into our rivers, in early February, March. I'd say we probably don't have many smelt shacks anymore because it's really our populations are down. I mean, they used to range as far down as the Chesapeake Bay. There was smelt in the Chesapeake, but now Massachusetts is pretty much the southern extent of the range, and even that's pretty collapsing pretty quickly. We used to have a pike net in the Parker River. We actually stopped it this past year, or this year. Last year was the last year that we were going to do that, and we were just seeing really pretty dismal returns. I mean, it was maybe one or two fish every couple of years we were seeing. So, I mean, and that net in the earlier years of when they were sending it, that net maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was, as many as, 800, 900 in a year. And then last year we had one or two. So they've kind of been on the losing end of that. And I think it's probably partly to do with habitat loss. A lot of the dams, a lot of the head of tide dams that have gone in have really kind of disrupted that habitat, their spawning habitat, because they tend to spawn in riffle habitats. So there's sort of rocky riffle areas above the head of tide. So it's probably like a death by 1,000 cuts. Their habitat degradation and loss. Climate change is making water, our water's warmer, which is negatively affects them more so than others. And yeah, I think those are probably our major reasons why we're not seeing as many smelt, unfortunately.
How about climate change impact on alewife? Are they sensitive to it? What do you anticipate might be the challenges of more extreme weather?
Sure, they are, and so there's been a couple of papers. I'm blanking on her name right now, but she did her master's at UMass Amherst, and she did a kind of a paper on showing about kind of the overall trends of what's happening with our alewives, and they are moving a little bit earlier, or yeah, they're coming into our rivers a little bit earlier, but unfortunately they're also They're not staying longer during that time, so they're coming in earlier and they're kind of leaving earlier, and so we're getting this sort of like truncated spawning period, if you will. The waters are warming up faster, and so they don't have as much time. It's not a crazy significant number. It's really only by like maybe a couple of days right now, but it could keep progressing in that way in the future, depending on what happens with climate change. So I'd say they're probably not as sensitive as the smelt are, but yeah, they will still be affected by it.
My question is similar to that. I was going to just ask if both the alewives and eels have an ideal temperature range in the lakes and the stream, and also just make a comment that riparian corridors are important to keep bodies of water cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And so wait, what was the first question again? If they
Well,
are
just like what is the ideal temperature range
temperature.
for both alewives and eels?
Yeah, it's pretty much around like 50 degrees Fahrenheit is when we typically start to see them start to spawn alewives. The eels will enter into the river a little bit sooner than that under colder temperatures, but they're not coming here to spawn, so it's kind of a little bit of a different situation.
Yep.
But yeah, I'd say for alewives, it's right around that 50-degree Fahrenheit mark.
Okay. And a quick question about the smelt as well. I'm familiar with steelhead on the West Coast. So are the smelt here kind of the equivalent of steelhead on the West Coast?
Maybe they're way smaller.
Okay.
Yeah, we're talking about fish that are like maybe 6 to 12 inches at most. They're relatively small, but I guess in the similar sort of anadromous lifestyle of the steelhead. Yes, but steelhead are a little bit different because they are just trout that happen to go into the ocean, sort of thing. Um, Whereas smelt are naturally occurring, naturally anadromous, so they have a life cycle that's in the ocean pretty much all the time. There's no straight freshwater smelt.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question about the eels. How do you
Yeah.
count them? Are they also being counted at the apple tree counter where the alewives go through, or you have a different method for that?
No, we have a different method. The counter at the Apple Street isn't strong enough to really detect eels. They're so tiny. So we have a pike net that we have in a spot below the Apple Street Dam. I won't say exactly where because it's a little bit of a hot button issue. There's some poaching efforts. The glass eels are a huge industry right now. They go for something like over $2,000 a pound. So there's poaching happening every once in a while, in certain areas. So we count them in a fight net, we collect them, they get sort of collected, we'll check it every 24 hours. And then we empty them to a bucket and we just count them by hand. When there's, a lot, when we have, a couple thousand in the net at a time, we'll do what's called a volumetric subsample. And so we'll essentially measure the total volume of eels that we have, and we'll take a subsample of that, and then we'll count those so we can get an accurate count. But it's just hand counting, basically.
And related to that, sometimes in the summer, I see in the middle of the night it looks like from the distance, like net fishing. And is that a counting expedition that's
yes,
going on? I think it is. It has lights and the people are looking at what comes up in the net.
Yes, UMass Amherst has some students and a professor that does some juvenile alewife work, and so they a couple of times a year they will set out a seine net from a boat, and they'll collect some juveniles. So that they can monitor the population. So they'll take a certain biological sample back so that they can age them, sort of see when they've hatched and see the conditions that they are, see kind of what they're eating in the system, and sort of the health of the juvenile population. So yes, that is scientists. They're not poaching. We know about that.
Joe, following up on the earlier conversation about the cycle and climate change, 6 months ago, we were having conversations because there was no flow in the brook and the alewife were trapped in the lake. And you said to us, we asked the question, will they survive? Will they winter over? And you pointed us directly to the issue of food. So could you just review for us, when do the adults after spawning go back out? And then what is the cycle for the juveniles between the time they're born and the time that they leave for the ocean?
Sure. So the adults will come in and they'll spend maybe a week or so, 5 or so days usually. They'll come in kind of waves. So each wave will sort of spend 5 days or so. And that might happen, up to a month or so, kind of, but they'll spawn in the lake and then pretty much head right out. So maybe the adults are spending about a week in the pond, spawning a couple of times. Then they'll head out. After they've laid their eggs, the eggs will take about 60 days or so to develop into juvenile fish where they'll stay in the pond and they'll grow. It really depends on the situation, the year, how much flow is in the pond, how many juveniles that are there. So Chebacco, like I said, it has a potential to hold a bigger population just because of the size and the amount of food that they have in there. They're usually eating plankton when they're juveniles, and as they get larger, they'll start ingesting sort of larger planktonic prey. So it really depends on how many juveniles are in there, what their food source is, that sort of thing.
And those factors dictate how soon they go out.
Yep.
And
If you have a
do
system
you
that
have
has
a ratio for the number of juveniles to an adult female?
Actual juveniles, I'm not sure. The females can lay anywhere from like 36 or 35,000 to like 300,000 eggs. So I'm not 100% sure how that translates to the amount of juveniles. I mean, there's a pretty big loss, just naturally, of course, but not totally sure how that number translates.
Another question. I heard something about how, I mean, the eels are going in and out of the system and the alewives at the same time, and how they provide cover for each other from predators. I think especially the eels giving cover for the alewives. And if that's true, can you comment on it? And can you also just comment on what the alewife predators are in the lake and the stream?
Sure. I haven't heard about providing cover. Um, I'm not necessarily sure that would be the case. They're Yeah, I don't think so. So the eels are really, really tiny. They're usually traveling along the substrate. So they're burrowing in substrate. They're traveling right along the bottom, and the alewives are sort of coming in waves. So they're overlapping, but I don't necessarily know that they're providing cover for one another. I think they're probably totally indifferent to each other. And what was the second question? I was sorry. Oh, the
Just
predators,
what
right?
predators?
Yep. Everything that can, and yeah, anything that can eat an alewife will eat an alewife. So basically, all of our bird species, we have osprey, we have blue herons, black-capped night herons, we have green herons, cormorants will eat them, otters, pretty much anything that can. We have our freshwater fishes, any ones that are big enough will eat them. Even the adults, they'll eat the adults, largemouth bass if they can get them, probably larger chain pickerel and things like that. And then anything basically will eat the juveniles that can. Probably all those same fishes, even same birds and everything. Yeah, so they're pretty much they're the food.
Okay.
So
Sorry.
go ahead.
Go back to the eels. Are they scavenging the lake bottom, and is that a good thing to have? The more the merrier?
Yeah, they'll eat. They're kind of another thing. They'll eat anything that they can. just depending on how big they are. So they'll start out with eating sort of insects, planktonic probably things, because they're just so tiny. And as they grow, they'll turn more into predators. And once they're like fully adult, they can start feeding on smaller fish. But they will also eat a lot of the sort of dead stuff that hangs out, and that's usually when they'll even eat some river herring, some of the adult river herring that come and end up not making it out, die, and kind of sink to the bottom of the pond. A lot of the eels will eat those too.
Thank you.
Joe, what is the length of the migratory season for the alewives coming in? And I'll make a little pitch while I've got the floor here, is that Joe keeps a whiteboard at the Pond Street Bridge, and he updates it probably weekly, maybe even more frequently at that. So how many fish came in this time period? It's fun to, if you're ever down that way, it's fun to see what the count is, and if you're lucky, you can actually watch them come through the counter at the Pond Street Bridge. And we also Robin Cantor updates the count on the Chebacco Lake Facebook page, so you can see what the progress is in any given year, any season. So anyway, back to my question: what is the migration?
They typically start sort of the end of March, beginning of April, and then they'll run pretty much till mid-May. Or maybe even towards the end, towards the beginning of June. So that's pretty much the system or the length of time that the adults are coming back into the rivers. So maybe about a month, a little bit longer than that, 5 weeks or so. Yeah, I'm just checking the dates actually from last year. And we had the first fish come about the last week in March, one of the last few days. And then we concluded the count about mid-May. So that was when we saw our first down runners. And then at that point, we pulled the counter because the fish don't like to go downstream through the tubes. They'll come up just fine, but they tend to just get stuck at that counter once they start trying to head downstream. So when we first see when we see our first group of down running fish, we'll pull those bars and let them go downstream. So there may be a couple of stragglers that are still coming into the pond after that, but that's pretty much, most of the population that we've captured.
I'm noodling in my head about the climate change issue and the out-migration of the alewife being interrupted by low water, drought, and so forth. And last week, IRWA put on a terrific legislative breakfast, and one of the speakers made the statement that has really stuck with me: a series of ponds is not a river. And that was addressing the amount of withdrawal coming out of the Ipswich River. But we're in Alewife Brook, we're running a drought every other year in the last few years, and long periods where we're not getting out migration. And it could be that it's not what's happening in the oceans, but it's what's happening in Alewife Brook in drought conditions that, as Joe says, affect each cohort on their return. And that really could devastate and unsettle the whole ecological balance of the lake, because Joe has emphasized over and over how vital alewife are to the whole food chain in the ecosystem. So the study that was done on the brook really, I don't think, thought too much about future climate change impacts on alewife, but I think we ought to go back and look at that again and see if we need to figure out other ways to ensure that we have that out migration taken care of, which might involve deepening or doing some dredging in the channel.
Yeah, there's definitely sections of the brook that have changed quite a bit, where they used to be, a really channelized river. Now they're sort of this kind of sprawling wetland situation where they still have a main channel, but I mean it's really more sprawling into like a swamp area, which tends to not be as good for the fish.
Yeah, in the last couple of years, at least, if not longer, the near the Apple Street Bridge, it was completely dry for many weeks in the summer, late summer, maybe starting in July or so until late into the season. So it's worrisome to see that.
Yeah, definitely. And also compounding to that issue is when we have those low water situations, really the beaver activity sort of kicks up a notch because they want to save the water. So they start damming up things, which could also affect down migrating fish.
Great. Hey, Joe, any closing remarks you'd like to make?
No, I think that's it. I hope everyone sort of enjoyed my talk. Maybe learned something cool about diadromous fish. So yeah, thank you everyone for coming, and yeah, hopefully I'll see you out there on the stream maybe.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks everyone
Thank
for
you.
coming.
I think we have one more question actually.
Oh, good. Question?
Oh, you got to unmute yourself.
I said, thank you so much, Joe. This is amazing. Would it disrupt the entire population if we gathered them up and put them in the ocean? In other words, do they have to have that journey in order to understand that they are coming back, where they're coming back? And I'm sorry, that's a silly question, but I just
No.
a community effort to get them over the drought area.
Yeah, no, great question. It probably wouldn't work so well. They're as juveniles, they're pretty quite sensitive to being captured and stuff. So they're really kind of sensitive fish. And it would be a quite a tall task to even capture them. They're usually moving overnight, and they're moving kind of in pulses. And they don't sort of, when they're juveniles, they're not schooling in one big giant school. They're sort of separated out into sort of smaller little schools. So it would be a really tall task, and I don't think it would be very successful. I think you probably do more harm than good to try and move them by hand. Really, the best option is let them swim like they want to swim.
Thanks.
Super. Well, thank you all, Joe. We're getting lots of very positive comments in the chat. Thanks so much for putting this together. I know it was a lot of work, and best of luck in this very busiest of seasons for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks again for everyone for coming.
Thank you all.